This is Backstage Sonoma, your all-access pass to the local music scene.
Coming to you from beautiful downtown Santa Rosa, this is the Backstage Sonoma podcast. And now, here's your host, Steve Roby.
Welcome to another episode of Backstage Sonoma. I'm Steve Roby. Today we're joined by Jenny Scheinman, an extraordinary violinist and composer known for her evocative soundscapes and unique blend of jazz and Americana. Jenny, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're so glad you can make it too. Jenny, you've seamlessly navigated between jazz and Americana throughout your career. As an artist, do you feel you belong more to one world than the other?
There's been a pretty big theme between my Americana albums and touring and my jazz touring. I actually haven't really found a way to kind of connect them. As an artist, I do go back and forth between them all the time. For example, I just did a tour with Robbie Folks, who I tour with quite a lot. I was out with him and Mary Gaucher, who's a phenomenal Americana songwriter, and then went to New York and did my jazz project. But just to clarify, I consider those two parts of myself as distinct and would never claim to be. In the Americana world, I actually sing and write songs and sing harmony and play fiddle. In jazz, I would never claim to be a even moderately good jazz singer. So there are two kind of parts of my life. I grew up in the country. I grew up singing country songs and folk songs with my father, and my family were the musicians of the town, and then got into jazz when I was in high school and followed that through being an instrumentalist violin player through the next 15 years of my life. And then at a certain point started really missing that early music that I played as a kid and got back into singing songs. I was an English major in college and really love words and well-crafted stories. So there's a part of me that always wants a little bit of that in my in my touring life. I love both. In my recording catalog of 10 albums, 2 are what you'd call Americana, and the other 8 are jazz recordings. So that might reflect a little bit of how many hours of my professional life I've spent on each. As a side person, I've done a whole lot of Americana stuff. I've toured with Rodney Crowell and Bruce Cockburn and Robbie Folks and Ani DeFranco, and played with Emmylou Harris and done arrangements for Lucinda Williams. It is actually quite a rich world of my life. But in terms of my own writing, and I think people's awareness of me as a musician, I'm pretty solidly 80% in the jazz world, which is what this new album is and what my tour is going to be in October.
Let's talk about the new album. It's called All Species Parade, and it's a rich homage to the lost coast of Humboldt County, where you grew up and have returned to live. How has this transition influenced your approach to music compared to your time in the urban landscape of New York?
The transition from New York, where I spent my 20s and 30s, or some of my 30s, to coming back home to the Lost Coast, was fraught with, I guess, ambivalence and frustration. And in the first years of moving back, it also coincided with having kids, which is a kind of developmental shift in my life as well, taking on new responsibilities, opening my worldview to include the next generation, and just being the caretaker of these 2 wonderful children. So a lot of the frustration that I, at the time, thought was about being disconnected from my peers and suddenly not being able to dedicate so much time to music and touring, probably was also just the growing pains of becoming a mom and taking on the responsibilities of having little kids.
Sure.
But I think that a really big shift happened in 2020 when I was grounded, like all the other musicians out there and touring people, because of the pandemic. And I spent a couple years solidly here on a personal level, I got to really spend time with my kids, which I think really fed my depth of perspective about life. I also luckily got to bubble up with a couple really marvelous musicians from the Bay Area who you might know since you're roughly located in the Bay Area, Beth Schenk and Matt Robel. Beth Schenk is a wonderful saxophone player, and her husband, Matt Robel, is a great guitar player. Also, John Wood, who's a local musician to where I live. Anyway, I was able to play a lot during that time.
Oh.
And because it was the shutdown and because we live in such a gorgeous area, a lot of that playing was done outside and out truly on the Lost Coast where I was raised in a sort of homestead, very, very rural environment. And I started, first of all, I felt so appreciative to be there rather than in New York, where so many of my friends were struggling to survive and live and deal with the ambulance serenade 24/7, or even a lot of them leaving. I was really working to find a way to write music about this area and write music about a rural landscape after living in the city for so long. And during those 2 years, I just did it by doing it. I found it by doing it. I played outside for many hours, almost every day with a couple other musicians. The Lost Coast is called the Lost Coast because it is very volatile. Tectonically, there's 3 big tectonic plates that are crashing together. Underneath it, it's one of the rainiest places in the lower 48. So there's tons of mudslides, earthquakes, etc. And when the Highway 101, which goes up the coast of California, was being built, they basically avoided that whole area because they didn't want to deal with the mudslides, etc.
Yeah.
So it's this chunk of California coastline that sticks out into the ocean. It's that part, the sort of westernmost part of California. And that's the Lost Coast. And I grew up right in basically the westernmost house in the lower 48, right above the mouth of the Mattole River.
Beautiful. Sounds beautiful. Well, let's play some music from the new album. The first track we're going to cover is called Nocturne for 2020. Can you share your thoughts on composing this song during such a turbulent year? And how do you think it reflects the mood of that time?
One thing is it's long. It's really, I let everybody say everything they want to say about that year and that song. The melody form repeats twice. It's a lament. It's also, one of the things I said before we recorded it to the musicians by way of instructing them how to play is don't play sad, play fierce. And it has a melody that could be played very sadly. Reflectively, I want it to be a song that really laments the death, so much death that year, and holds that year in the song and the gravity of that time in the song, and also buries it like goodbye. It's a nocturne. We're putting it to sleep.
Thank goodness.
It also hopefully conjures the place I was at, which is the possibility and the hope that is inherent in the beauty of the natural world of growth and of variation and variety and diversity. It's a goodbye to 2020.
Okay. Well, let's play it now. This is called Nocturne for 2020. Our guest is musician Jenny Scheinman, and you're listening to Backstage Sonoma. And we're back with my guest, musician Jenny Scheinman. Jenny, you've collaborated on this album with guitar legends like Bill Frisell, Julian Lage, and Nels Cline. What was the process like incorporating their unique styles into your compositions, and how did these collaborations influence the recordings?
Two of those collaborations are like lifelong collaborations. Bill Frisell has been one of my main employers, and I would say in a very old-fashioned framework, I've been a sort of apprentice to him. I've played with him since I was in my 20s and learned so much about his writing. I feel like, of course, we've influenced each other, but he's an elder, and I've really taken a lot of his ideas about band leading, about improvisation, about interactive, supportive playing. It influenced me very much. And also, there's a sort of reassurance in playing with him because I've spent so many hours on the stage with him and in recording sessions with him that we know each other very well. So we can rely on each other. Nels Cline, likewise, I met when I was in California in my very early 20s. We did a lot of touring on the West Coast together. He's a different kind of musician. I brought him in some ways because the album is about California, and he's got that Southern California energy, punk rock. I brought him in on two tunes. One is a surf tune, and I wanted that LA spirit in there.
Right.
The other tune is this sort of swirly, swarmy tune where we blend tones, which is something we started doing a long time ago. And every time we play together, we find some opportunity to do that together. Those tunes are just very much influenced by my relationships with those musicians. Julian Lage is somebody I've known for a while, and we've been wanting to collaborate. I also, as a sort of casting director, was really excited to have all three of them on the same album, just to honor three of my very favorite musicians and artists, and my life, which has been studded with this tremendous just opportunities to play with guitar players, specifically guitar players. I've had such an incredible, lucky life in that regard. So Julian Lage, I also brought in musically, I brought him in specifically to play acoustic guitar. And I wanted him to tease out something a little bit more rhapsodic and virtuoso in Nocturne and also in Jaro Gigi, both of those tunes. Probably what I was hearing was influenced somewhat by the maybe Shakti, John McLaughlin playing acoustic guitar. I really lived on those albums when I was a teenager. Maybe also some Django, the tune he plays rhythm guitar on, which is called Shutdown Stomp. He plays a very much of a straightforward, like Django kind of rhythm. So I brought him in to do that and really feature him on two tunes and get him right in the rhythm section on another tune.
For our next music break, we're going to listen to Ornette Goes Home. I assume this song's title references the innovative jazz saxophonist Ornette Coleman. Can you talk about the song?
The song is really a lively, playful song where I get to introduce everybody in the band, everybody solos. It's a fun tune. The title conjures the idea of the things about our home bioregion, the area where we grew up, and the way in which those influence our ear as musicians, the way we carry that accent or those influences through our life. And in terms of Ornette Coleman, it's a fantasy of Ornette Coleman going back to Fort Worth. Say there were a pandemic in Ornette's life and he was in his 30s and he had to go back and live with his parents, or he had to go back to Fort Worth, or any time in his life that he went back there. What was it like to be in that air, in those smells, in the context, the musical context of his childhood, and recognize the way that may have influenced him, even in his very much more sophisticated urban life of his adulthood.
Interesting. Let's listen to it now. This is Jenny Scheinman. The song is called Ornette Goes Home, and this is Backstage Sonoma. Jenny, many tracks on the album extend well beyond the typical song length of, let's say, 5 minutes. What was your intention in allowing these pieces so much room to breathe, and how did this space affect the musicians' improvisations?
This is the first album of mine where I've consistently invited the musicians to really go for it in their solos and not restrict the improvisations at all. A lot of my other albums are much more concise and much more informed by, as you were saying earlier, this sort of aesthetic of Americana or song, where the melody is really dominant and the improvisations comment on that. And they're very concise. This album, in honor of the idea of growth and natural diversity, wild diversity, and the mystery and freedom of that, I really wanted us to elaborate. I wanted us to have time and space to really follow a narrative in the improvisations. And I was also responding to a comment I got many, many years ago from writer Ben Ratliff, who reviewed one of my shows with Jason Moran and Paul Motion. I did a week of shows with Jason Moran and Paul Motion. This is going back 15, 20 years, something like that. But he was an early champion of mine and a fan. But he did comment, and this stuck with me, that when working with musicians on the level of Paul Motion and Jason Moran, he suggested that I let them spill over the edges a little bit more and, I guess, exploit their natural genius for true opening in the improvisation. And so on this album, I really embraced that. And I wanted the musicians to go for it. I want to mention this because you're in the Bay Area. I also did a recording session about a week before I recorded All Species Parade. And it was with a local Bay Area musician named Richard Howell and his son, L.A. Howell, who's a marvelous drummer, and a big cast of characters. And in that session, Richard had these fairly simple sort of fragments of tunes almost. Well, not fragments, but they were simple tunes. And we elaborated those into epic length pieces, epic length recordings. And it gave me kind of a dry run at a way of leading a band through a real I don't want to say exploratory because I don't feel like my songs wander that much, but just inviting the musicians. Richard Howell taught me a little bit about how to invite musicians to both stick to the song and also feel invited to say everything they want to say.
And you accomplished that on this album. It sounds great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I was curious about the album's title and what that references.
All Species Parade is taken from a parade that happens in Humboldt County every year. In fact, it's happening this coming weekend. It's called the All Species Parade, and it happens at the North Country Fair. It doesn't just happen here. It happens all over the country and the world, and it's a celebration of biodiversity. And at the All Species Parade, people dress up like all sorts of different animals. My mother is in it every year I think she's in a wolf costume. And there's just all sorts of marvelous animals portrayed in this parade around the central plaza of Arcata, which is the town where I live.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thanks for clearing that up. I was just curious. I've never been to one, but I hope to go someday. It sounds like fun. You have a tour that'll stop by San Francisco upcoming in a few weeks from now. And it's going to stop at Mr. Tipple's Jazz Club. What can fans look forward to at these shows?
Well, one really somewhat crazy part of this tour is those Mr. Tipple shows, because I'm doing 8 shows. Wow. I'm doing a complete marathon on the night of the release, which is October 11th. I'm doing 4 separate shows at Mr. Tipple's. I'm playing at 6, 7:30, 8, 9, and 10:30. So I'm doing 4 different shows.
Wow.
We probably won't repeat that much. We may repeat a few songs because I want to make sure that everybody in the audience hears some of the album on each set, on each show.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we will be jazz musicians and will approach the material as musical conversationalists and revelers, and we'll celebrate the melodies, we'll celebrate the grooves. And I think every time I do a tour, the music develops in some way. I wouldn't say it's underdeveloped on the album, but we will be responding to the audience. We'll be responding to whatever we saw that day and what feels right in the room. There's so many world events happening right now. I'm sure that will affect the vibe. And jazz is a way of talking about what's happening right then. It's very much in the moment. So we'll be able to converse in a way with each other and with the audience about what is in the air right then. And we're going to have a lot of fun. I mean, one thing about performance, maybe versus recording, is that it's a party. There's a lot of people in a room that have come to open their minds, get inspired, celebrate what we can do as humans and artists. And maybe they have a date, maybe they have their kid there. We are there to entertain them and open their minds and remind everyone that life is worth celebrating.
Absolutely. Well, let me remind our listeners, Jenny Scheinman will perform at Mr. Tipple's Jazz Club in San Francisco from Thursday, October 10th through Saturday, October 12th. Tickets can be purchased with a link on jennyscheinman.com. Just go to the tour page and look for more info. Jenny, thank you so much for sharing these insights and stories with us today.
Thank you very much.
Backstage Sonoma will be right back after this quick break.
Welcome to Backstage Sonoma, your all-access pass to the heartbeat of the Bay Area music scene. From jazz to rock, blues to world music, we bring you intimate conversations with the artists shaping our soundscape. Hear their stories, explore their inspirations, and dive deep into the creative process that makes each performance unforgettable. Hosted by Steve Roby, seasoned radio personality and best-selling author, Backstage Sonoma has featured Grammy winners like Judy Collins, Colby Kyle Lott, Leslie Mendelsohn, and chart-topping guitarist Adam Hawley. With over 200 episodes and 4 years of exclusive content, we keep you connected to the local and touring musicians making waves today. Whether you're a lifelong music lover or discovering new tunes, join us on Backstage Sonoma, available on all major streaming platforms, including YouTube. Don't miss a beat. Subscribe now and be part of our growing community of listeners. Backstage Sonoma, where the music never stops.
Thanks for listening to the Backstage Sonoma podcast. Join us next time for more great interviews and music from local and touring musicians. You can find us on the web at backstagesonoma.com.